He thought she wouldn't last 5 minutes in his gym. But the truth was, she had already measured everyone in that room the second she walked in. The air smelled like rubber mats and iron, the steady rhythm of weights hitting the floor echoing across the space as mirrors reflected bodies in motion, all focused, all confident, all certain they belonged there, everyone except her. Emily Carter stepped through the glass doors quietly, wearing a plain black t-shirt, fitted leggings, and running shoes that had clearly seen better days. Her short hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her expression calm, unreadable, almost invisible. No one greeted her. No one needed to. In places like this, people didn't ask who you were. They decided what you were worth in seconds. And Jake Reynolds had already made his decision. From across the room, leaning against a rack of 45-pound plates, arms crossed over his chest, he watched her with a half-smile that never reached his eyes, the kind of look that wasn't curiosity, but judgment. He'd built his reputation in this gym on authority, on knowing who could handle the weight and who would fold under it. And in his mind, she didn't even register as a challenge. "You lost," he called out, his voice cutting clean through the noise, drawing a few heads to turn, a few smirks to form. The room didn't stop, but it shifted, attention narrowing just enough to notice the moment. Emily paused, just slightly, her hand resting on the strap of her small gym bag, then continued walking as if the comment hadn't landed at all. That silence, that refusal to react, only made the grin on Jake's face widen. "We don't do beginner classes on this side," he added, louder this time, inviting the room into the joke. A couple of guys chuckled. Someone near the squat racks shook his head, already deciding how this would end. Emily set her bag down near an empty bench, her movements unhurried, precise, as if she had done this 1,000 times before, as if none of this was new to her. But there was something else, something subtle in the way she looked at the equipment, not with hesitation, but with recognition. Jake pushed off the rack and walked closer, each step deliberate, claiming the space between them like it was his to control. "Look," he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound almost reasonable, though the edge never left it. "This isn't a place for people to just try things out. You either know what you're doing, or you don't." The room leaned in without meaning to. Emily finally looked at him, her eyes steady, not defensive, not impressed, just certain. And for a split second, something flickered in Jake's expression, something he didn't recognize yet. Then she spoke, her voice calm, even. "I know exactly what I'm doing." And that was the moment everything began to change, though no one in that gym realized it yet. The room did not erupt, it did not react the way moments like this usually did. Instead it held its breath, the kind of quiet that builds when people are waiting for something to go wrong. Jake let out a short laugh, shaking his head as if he had just heard the most ridiculous thing all day. "You know exactly what you are doing," he repeated, louder now, turning slightly so the others could hear, making sure the moment stretched just enough to pull them in. "All right then, let us see it." A few people stepped closer, not aggressively, but out of curiosity, forming a loose circle around the bench area. Someone near the dumbbell rack crossed his arms. Another leaned against a machine, already expecting the outcome. Emily did not rush. She adjusted the sleeves of her shirt slightly, then reached for the barbell, her fingers brushing against the cold steel with familiarity, not hesitation. Jake noticed that. It was small, but it did not fit the picture he had already painted of her. "Let us keep it simple," he said, sliding a 45-pound plate onto each side with a metallic click that echoed through the gym. 135 pounds. Most people start there. If you cannot handle that, we are done. The tone in his voice carried more than instruction, it carried judgment, a line drawn clearly in front of everyone watching. Emily stepped forward, positioning herself at the bench, her movements measured, almost deliberate, as if every step had already been decided long before she walked into this room. A faint murmur moved through the crowd. "She is not even warming up," someone whispered. Jake folded his arms again, confident, certain that whatever happened next would confirm what he already believed. "Go ahead," he said. Emily lay back, her eyes tracing the bar for a brief second, then closing just long enough to take a steady breath. And in that small, quiet moment, something shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like a switch being flipped that no one else fully understood. Her hands wrapped around the bar, firm, balanced, exact. She lifted it off the rack smoothly. No hesitation, no struggle, just control. 1 rep, clean. The bar moved like it belonged there. She lowered it, paused, then pressed again. And again, each movement identical to the last, steady, precise, almost effortless. The whispers stopped. Jake's smile faded, just slightly, replaced by something sharper, something closer to attention. This was not what he expected, not even close. And yet, he said nothing, because admitting that would mean he had been wrong from the very beginning. The bar settled back into the rack with a soft metallic click, but the silence that followed was heavier than any weight in the room, because it was no longer about whether she could lift it. It was about what they had all just witnessed and could not explain away. Emily sat up slowly, not out of exhaustion but out of control, every movement steady, composed, as if nothing unusual had just happened. A few people glanced at each other, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether acknowledging it would make it more real. Jake stepped forward, his expression tightening, searching for something to hold on to, something that would restore the balance he was used to controlling. "All right," he said, forcing a short laugh that did not carry the same confidence as before. Not bad for a start. But his tone had shifted, the edge now sharper, less playful, more defensive. He reached for another plate, sliding it onto the bar with a louder clang than necessary, the sound cutting through the tension. "Let us see how you handle 185. The number hung in the air, heavier than the steel itself. A few heads turned again, this time not with amusement, but with curiosity. Someone near the back whispered, "That is not beginner weight." Emily did not respond. She stood, rolled her shoulders once, a small motion that revealed something most had missed before, a kind of muscle memory, the quiet preparation of someone who understood exactly what came next. Jake watched closely now, no longer leaning back, no longer relaxed. There was a flicker of doubt there, quickly buried under his need to stay in control of the moment. "Go ahead," he said, but it was no longer an invitation, it was a challenge. Emily stepped back into position, her hands finding the bar again without adjustment, without hesitation, as if it had always been there waiting for her. The room narrowed around her, conversations fading, machines slowing, attention locking in completely. She unracked the weight. For a brief second, the bar hovered in perfect stillness above her, balanced, centered, controlled. Then she lowered it with precision, paused, and pressed. The movement was slower this time, but not weaker, just measured, deliberate, undeniable. 1 repetition, then another. No shaking, no strain that they could see, just control. A man near the dumbbells lowered his phone without realizing it. Jake's jaw tightened. This was no longer luck. This was no longer something he could dismiss. And somewhere in the back of the room, a voice, quiet but clear, broke through the silence. "I have seen that form before." Jake turned his head slightly, just enough to hear it, just enough to feel the first real crack in his certainty, because whatever this was, it was not what he thought he was dealing with. The words lingered in the air longer than they should have, because recognition, even uncertain recognition, has a way of unsettling people faster than failure ever could. Jake heard it, even if he pretended not to, and that was enough to tighten something in his chest he could not quite explain. He stepped closer to the bench now, no longer observing from a distance, no longer playing to the room, but watching her directly, trying to find the flaw, the mistake, the proof that this was still under his control. "All right," he said, his voice firmer, sharper, as if volume alone could restore authority. 185 is solid. But that does not mean anything if you cannot go further. The confidence in his tone sounded practiced now, less natural, more forced. He reached for another plate without waiting for a response, sliding it onto the bar with a decisive motion, then another, building the weight with quick, deliberate movements. 225, he announced, stepping back, folding his arms again. But this time there was no lean, no ease, just tension disguised as composure. A low murmur moved through the gym, different from before, quieter, more cautious. People were no longer expecting a failure, they were watching for an answer. Emily stood still for a moment, looking at the bar, not with doubt, but with a kind of quiet calculation, as if she was measuring something no one else could see. Her breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged, grounded, controlled. The noise of the gym faded again, machines slowing, conversations dissolving, until all that remained was the faint hum of lights above and the presence of the moment itself. She stepped forward. No hesitation. No adjustment. Just certainty. Her hands found the bar again, exactly where they needed to be. Jake watched closely, searching her face for strain, for uncertainty, for anything that would confirm his version of the story. He found none. She unracked the weight. The bar dipped slightly, just enough to remind everyone how heavy it truly was. But then it steadied, locked into place by something stronger than appearance could explain. She lowered it, controlled, precise, paused at the bottom, and pressed. The movement was slower, yes, but unbroken, unwavering, rising with a kind of quiet authority that filled the room without a single word. One repetition. Clean. She racked it again without celebration, without effort to impress, just completion. And that was when the silence changed. It was no longer anticipation. It was realization. Jake did not speak. For the first time since she walked in, he had nothing to say, because whatever he thought he understood about her, about this moment, about control, had just slipped out of his hands, and he could feel it happening in real time. No one moved, not immediately, because moments like that do not end with noise. They end with silence that feels heavier than anything that came before. Emily stepped back from the bench, her breathing steady, her expression unchanged, as if what she had just done required no explanation, no acknowledgement, no reaction. Around her, people shifted, exchanging glances that carried a new kind of uncertainty, not about her, but about themselves, about how quickly they had decided who she was the moment she walked through that door. Jake remained where he stood, arms still crossed, but the posture no longer held the same authority. It looked rigid now, almost uncertain, like he was holding on to something that had already slipped away. He cleared his throat, the sound cutting awkwardly through the quiet. "All right," he said, but the word landed differently this time, lacking the sharp edge it once had. That was solid. He nodded once, as if that could re-establish control, as if reducing it to a compliment could shrink what had just happened back into something manageable. But the room did not respond the way it used to. No laughter, no easy agreement. Just watching, waiting. And that was when the voice from earlier spoke again, clearer now, more certain. "I know her." Heads turned toward the back, where a man stepped forward slowly, his eyes fixed on Emily with recognition that could not be mistaken. "Emily Carter," he said, almost to himself at first, then louder. "You competed at the national level about 10 years ago. Powerlifting division." A ripple moved through the crowd, quiet but undeniable. Jake's expression tightened, his eyes flicking back to Emily, searching for denial, for correction, for anything that would undo what had just been said. Emily did not react right away. She simply picked up a towel from her bag, wiping her hands calmly, as if the name meant nothing more than a passing comment. But the man continued, his voice carrying the weight of certainty now. "You set records. I remember watching your meets online. You disappeared after that." The gym seemed to shrink around that statement, the space suddenly smaller, more focused, as every assumption made just minutes ago collapsed in on itself. Jake took a small step back without realizing it. For the first time, he was not the one controlling the narrative, not the one defining the moment. He looked at her again, really looked this time, and what he saw was not what he had expected when she first walked in. Emily finally met his gaze, her eyes calm, steady, not challenging, not triumphant, just clear. And in that quiet exchange, everything that had been said before, every judgment, every word, hung in the air with a weight that could not be ignored, because respect, once lost, does not return easily. The name settled over the room like a weight no one was prepared to carry, because recognition changes everything, not just how you see someone, but how you see yourself in that moment. Jake did not speak right away, and that silence from him was louder than anything he had said before. His eyes stayed on Emily, but the confidence that once defined his stance had thinned, replaced by something more cautious, more uncertain. "National level," he repeated under his breath, as if saying it quietly might make it less real, less disruptive to the image he had built in his mind just minutes earlier. Around them, the energy in the gym shifted again, not into excitement, but into awareness. People straightened, some stepping back, others watching more closely, as if they were suddenly in the presence of something they had failed to recognize at first glance. Emily set the towel down and reached for her water bottle, taking a slow sip, completely unaffected by the attention now directed at her. There was no pride in her posture, no need to explain or confirm anything that had been said. That calm, that control, only made the contrast sharper. Jake exhaled and forced a small smile, trying to recover the ground he had lost. "Well," he said, louder this time, attempting to bring back a sense of normalcy. "That explains a few things." But even he could hear it, the lack of conviction in his own voice. It did not land the way he intended. No one laughed. No one echoed him. The room had already moved past that version of the moment. He stepped closer again, but this time there was no challenge in his movement, no attempt to dominate the space, just a need to stand on even ground. "You could have said something," he added, not accusing, not entirely, but searching for a reason, something that would make his earlier behavior feel less misplaced. Emily looked at him for a moment, her expression unchanged, her eyes steady, thoughtful, but not unkind. "You did not ask," she replied simply. The words were quiet, but they carried through the space with clarity that no raised voice could match. And just like that, the weight of everything that had happened shifted again, settling not on her, but on him. Jake nodded once, slowly, absorbing it, because there was nothing to argue with, nothing to push back against. The truth did not need volume. It just needed to exist. And in that moment, standing in the center of his own gym, surrounded by the people who had once followed his lead without question, Jake realized something he had not expected to learn that day. That strength was not always about what you could lift, but about what you chose not to prove, and that realization stayed with him long after the room fell silent once more. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted slowly, like a room learning how to breathe again after holding it for too long. And with that shift came something unfamiliar in that space, not intimidation, not mockery, but respect that had not been there before. Jake stepped back, giving her space without realizing he was doing it. His posture no longer defensive, no longer rigid, just different. The authority he once carried so easily had been replaced by something quieter, something earned in a way he had not expected. Around them, people began to move again, but more carefully, more aware, as if the rules of the room had subtly changed. A man near the racks nodded toward Emily, not exaggerated, not performative, just acknowledgement. Someone else cleared a path without being asked. The gym was still the same place, same lights, same weights, same sounds, but the energy had shifted in a way that could not be reversed. Emily picked up her bag, adjusting the strap over her shoulder with the same calm precision she had shown from the moment she walked in, as if none of this had been about proving anything to anyone, as if it had simply been another routine moment in a much longer story. Jake watched her, the question still there, not spoken this time, but understood. "Why here?" he finally asked, his voice quieter now, not challenging, not mocking, just genuine curiosity breaking through what was left of his pride. Emily paused, just for a second, her hand resting lightly on the strap of her bag, her gaze moving across the gym, taking in the space, the people, the moment as it now existed. "Because it is just a gym," she said simply. No explanation, no story, no need to justify anything further. And that answer, simple as it was, carried more weight than anything else she had done that day, because it stripped away every assumption, every label, every expectation that had been placed on her the moment she walked in. Jake nodded slowly, absorbing it, because there was nothing else to say, nothing else to challenge. The room had already learned what it needed to learn. Emily turned and walked toward the exit, her steps steady, unhurried, as if she had arrived, done what she came to do, and left the rest behind without a second thought. No one stopped her. No one spoke. They simply watched, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of understanding. And as the door closed softly behind her, the sound barely audible over the hum of the gym, something lingered in the space she left behind, not her presence, but the realization that strength does not announce itself. It reveals itself only when it has to, and by then, it is already too late to doubt it. The door had barely settled back into place when the room began to move again, but nothing felt the same, not the rhythm, not the conversations, not even the sound of weights returning to the floor. Jake stood where he was for a moment longer, staring at the space she had just left behind, as if something important had slipped past him and he was only now realizing it. Around him, people resumed their routines, but there was a difference in the way they carried themselves, a quiet awareness that had not existed before, like a lesson had been written into the air and no one could ignore it. One of the younger members approached the bench slowly, glancing at the bar where the plates still sat, untouched, as if removing them too quickly would erase what had just happened. She made that look easy, he said under his breath, not to anyone in particular, just acknowledging what everyone had seen. Jake exhaled and stepped forward, finally reaching for the bar, his hands wrapping around it with familiarity, but the feeling was different now, heavier in a way that had nothing to do with pounds or plates. He lifted it slightly, testing it, then set it back down, the metal echoing softly. It was not the weight that had changed. It was him. He looked around the gym, at the people who had laughed earlier, at the ones who had watched, at the ones who had said nothing, and for the first time, he saw the moment from the outside, the way it must have looked before everything shifted. A few of them avoided his eyes. Others gave small nods, not mocking, not critical, just understanding. The man who had recognized Emily stood nearby, arms folded, watching quietly. "You did not see it," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Jake nodded once, slowly. "No," he admitted, the word quiet but honest. The man gave a slight shrug. "Most people do not." There was no judgment in it, only truth. Jake leaned back against the rack, the same place he had stood earlier, but the confidence that once filled that position had been replaced by reflection, by the awareness that authority built on assumption does not last long when it is tested by reality. The gym continued around him, the sounds returning, the movement picking up, but something remained beneath it all, something quieter, stronger. Because moments like that do not just pass, they stay, shaping how people look, how they speak, how they decide who belongs and who does not. And long after the noise returned, Jake knew that the next time someone walked through that door, he would not be so quick to decide what they were worth, because he had already seen what happens when you get it wrong. The next morning, the gym opened like it always did, the lights flickering on, the machines humming to life, the familiar rhythm returning as if nothing unusual had ever happened. But for those who had been there, the space carried something different beneath the surface, something quieter, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood. Jake arrived earlier than usual, keys in hand, unlocking the doors with a pause that lingered just a second longer than it used to. He stepped inside, looking across the empty floor, the racks, the mirrors, the same setup he had seen every day for years, but now it felt less like a place he controlled and more like a place he needed to understand. He walked to the bench where it had all happened, the bar resting exactly where it had been left, and for a moment, he just stood there, remembering not the lift, but the look in her eyes, calm, certain, unshaken by anything around her. A few early members trickled in, greeting him with nods, nothing dramatic, nothing different on the surface, but there was a subtle shift in how they looked at each other, a shared awareness that had not existed before. One of them approached, setting down a bag near the rack, glancing at Jake briefly. "You think she will come back?" he asked, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. Jake did not answer right away. He looked toward the entrance, the glass doors reflecting the morning light, the same way they had the day before. "Maybe," he said finally, his voice steady, but thoughtful. And then he added, almost to himself, "Or maybe she already gave us what we needed." The man nodded, understanding more than the words themselves. The gym filled slowly, the usual sounds returning, weights moving, conversation starting, but something had changed in the way people watched, in the way they paused before judging, in the way they gave space without being asked. And as Jake moved through the room, adjusting plates, offering guidance, speaking to members, there was a difference in him too, not in strength, not in skill, but in awareness, in the quiet recognition that not everything valuable announces itself, and not everyone needs to prove who they are. Later that day, as the sun shifted through the windows and the rhythm of the gym settled into its steady pace, Jake caught his reflection in the mirror, just for a second, and what he saw was not the same certainty he had relied on before, but something better, something earned. Because that day, without raising her voice, without asking for recognition, without staying to explain herself, Emily Carter had changed more than a moment. She had changed the way that room understood strength. And long after she left, that understanding remained, not loud, not obvious, but undeniable.